As he looked out at Jon Snow, he felt something he had only felt once in his life. Hate. He actually hated the boy. It should have given him pause. But it didn't. The boy was proving to be an absolute nightmare for him. Initially, he'd been so happy to see Ned's son do so well. To see him training to be a knight in the South and far away from that heathen place his father called home. Even seeing him with the Lannisters had, in Jon's mind, been well worth it. At least with them, he'd learned to follow the true faith. Meeting the boy for the first time at Casterly Rock had been like seeing Ned reborn, though quickly he had come to realize that while he may look like his father, Jon Snow was a far cleverer young man. The things he'd done, the achievements he'd made beggared belief. The mines, the windwheel, the ships, those damnable ships. When he'd seen one up close, he'd shuddered. If those things were ever turned into warships, they'd be unstoppable. The Fury looked like a rowboat, alongside the monstrosity in the docks. He turned to look as the boy smirked at him before bowing. The nerve of him a bastard born of lust and desire. He glowered at the boy. Though it was to no avail, the boy seemed impervious to scorn, which itself was surprising. Most bastards knew their place and accepted it. But Jon Snow thought far too much of himself. As he looked at him facing the large boy, he hoped that at least this one would teach him respect, that he would manage to do what his own lads had failed so terribly at. "Look at him, Jon. Did you see him? Did you see what he did to those lads?" Robert said, laughing, and Jon felt like screaming loudly. "Aye, your grace, most impressive. 3 of them, Jon, 3 of them, and he took them down like they were nothing. Ned should have been here to see it, to see his boy." Robert said, sitting on the edge of his seat watching as Jon Snow landed hit after hit on the large boy. Jon just nodded along and continued to glower angrily at the boy. It had seemed so simple to him. When he and Peter had discussed things after the meeting with Jaime Lannister, his friend had come up with some interesting plans. The nerve of him. "Who does he think he is to speak to us like that, Petter? I want the Queen's expenses cut, her and the prince. From now on, we give them the barest minimum. Let her go cry to Casterly Rock for coin." Jon said angrily, "Of course, my lord. As you wish. We needs must make things right with the Tyrells. Though, my lord, should they decide to withhold their coin, then we're in serious trouble." "Aye, I know, but I'll not go grovel to that old witch again," Jon said, shaking his head. "Leave it to me, my lord. I know what to say to Olenna Tyrell, but you'll need to speak to the king. We'll have to give them something. Have them as guests of honor at the feast. Show them we're on their side." "You think that'll be enough, Petyr? You know what they want." "And damn, but not even I can make Robert give them that. He wants a Stark bride for his son, as if the last Stark girl didn't already almost cost us the throne. We needs must let them think it's happening, though. My lord, let them believe. Perhaps we can bleed them for more while we do so." "Aye, you're right. Now what about the damn Lannisters? The boy, my lord, Jon Snow, Ned's lad?" "Aye, my lord. Jaime's quite taken with him. Should something happen to the lad and you were to step in, we could use that." Petyr said, a smile on his face. "But we can't hurt the lad, Petyr. He's Ned's lad. I won't have him hurt." "Of course not, my lord. Something else. Something which would need your help with." "Something legal. Think on this." "As you wish, my lord," Petty said, getting up to leave. "Thank you, Petyr. You're a great help. I don't know what I'd do without you. I live to serve my lord." When he'd heard about what happened at the feast, he was irate, but it gave him the opportunity to use it. Something surprisingly the Queen was well ahead of him on, and had already set in motion. But then things had gone wrong there. Robert had arrived and tried to stop things before they started. He talked him round a little, but even then it fell apart. Where the boy had learned to speak like that, he didn't know. Though he'd heard tale that the imp was clever, perhaps that was it. He wondered as Robert cheered the bastard on beside him. He'd almost lost his composure completely during the boy's responses. Everything went downhill fast after that, and then out of nowhere, the boy suggested a damn honor joust. He'd never even heard of such a thing. Him, an anointed knight of the Seven. And yet this bastard boy from the heathen north knew of honor jousts. It made him furious. Before he could step in, though, his foolish good brother had accepted. Robert, of course, loved the idea, bragging about the damn boy's balls all the way back to his chambers. His foster son was an absolute fool. He knew that now. He'd known it then, but he was the only route to the throne. At times, he tempered his worst impulses, worked it so they were forgotten, though at the cost of coin for tourneys or whores for feasts and wine. But occasionally even he couldn't rein him in. And when it came to Jon Snow, that's what probably upset him the most. The boy reminded Robert far too much of Ned, so his feelings were always at the forefront of his decisions when the boy was concerned, threatening to legitimize Maya. God's how he hoped the lie he told there didn't come back to bite him. As if Michael Redford would marry a bastard girl, but lie he had because one legitimized bastard could lead to more. And Jon shuddered at the thought. So when it came to Jon Snow, the only way to handle Robert was to see the boy humbled on the field. If he saw him being beaten, then he'd forget about him. He'd still think of him as Ned's son, but not as the warrior reborn which he was starting to see him as. Ever since that damn tourney, he wanted to see the boy fight again, so Jon would show him the boy was nothing special. It had worked mainly. Robert was bored in his matches with the phrase. Jon had arranged it so his opponents were so poor that the king would lose interest, and it worked. God's Jon. These phrases are awful. Surely there's better competition out there for Ned's boy. I'm sure there is, your grace, but the draw is the draw, Jon said, smiling as Robert took another drink. Gods, even my weakling son could have beaten those two. Robert laughed, and Jon looked on as the queen and prince glared at the king. Isn't that right, boy? Even you could beat the damn phrase. I could beat them all, father. If I was out there, I'd win the whole thing for sure, Joffrey said loudly and gloatingly. Then why aren't you, boy? Why aren't you out there? Robert looked at his son with disdain. Your grace, it wouldn't do for the crown prince to take part in such a spectacle, Jon Arryn said, and hated the pleased look he got in return from the queen. Wouldn't do to see him being knocked on his arse, you mean? Robert said, laughing loudly. Yes, it had worked all right, perhaps too well. The king's attention forced from the duels to his nightmare of a son. Gods. Jon was thankful he'd be long dead before that horror ever took the throne. He looked back out to the field and was annoyed and aggravated to see Jon Snow hold his sword to the tall blonde lad's neck. The damn bastard had won it all, again. Instead of gaining coin from the Lannisters, he'd actually be shelling out coin to them. Well, to their damn bastard squire. Did you see that, Jon? Now that was a fight. Where are they going? Call them back. No, wait, look at him. Jon, look at Ned's boy, helping his friend off the field. Now there's a son any father would be proud of. I'm sure Ned is very proud, your grace, Jon said through gritted teeth. He damn well better be, Robert said before laughing and draining his drink. Marjorie. Marjorie had looked on in horror as the boy caught her brother across the head. She jumped up and shouted out her brother's name, much to the disgust of the prince sitting a few seats away. When she saw Jon go after the boys, though she had felt it deep in her heart, he would protect him. He'd make sure they didn't hurt him more. Jon was fierce, and had those boys not hurt Loras, he'd have scared her. But instead, she felt happy to see him hurt them, happy to see them fall. When she saw Jon throw his sword down after beating the boys, she had almost swooned. He was a true knight, her true knight. A voice in here had said, and she shook it away for now, more worried for Loras than anything else. She turned to her mother, who was looking just as concerned as she was, her grandmother fiercely looking at the Vale and River Lords. He's up, thank the Seven, her mother said. And Marjorie looked out to the field as Jon helped Loras to his feet. Is he all right? Is my boy all right? Her father said. And as Marjorie waited for her grandmother's barb, it never came. He is my love, look, her mother said, her relief clear. Marjorie watched as John spoke to the large blonde boy. Were they the final two? Did John not yield so he could go to her brother? She wasn't sure what was happening, but she watched as John smiled and shook his head before Laura said something to him, and he nodded. Her brother stumbled to the ground but stayed seated looking on, and she felt her heart beat slow as she realized he was hurt, but not too badly. She looked around the crowd as John picked his sword up and walked forward to address the king. "It seems we have one more match, Your Grace," John said, and he smiled before the king laughed. When he turned to face the other boy, Marjorie was stunned. She hadn't noticed it before. It wasn't the boy John was facing. It was a girl, a rather tall girl. She watched as John and the girl spoke before laughing. Who was this girl? Did John know her? Were they friends? Marjorie found herself looking at the girl more closely. She and John began to fight. It was different, much different than the fight with the boys. Was this because he liked this girl? She watched as the fight went on. Watching John move was like watching a dance, and she now felt even more upset that they hadn't had the dance he promised her. A part of her didn't like that he was dancing with this girl here now, even though it was a far different type of dancing. When John won, she cheered along with the whole crowd and waited for him to notice her, to smile at her like he always did. But John didn't wait, didn't look to her. Instead, he walked with the girl away from them, and Marjorie felt her heart sink. She looked down at her hands on her lap and shook her head sadly. She needed to go and see Loris and make sure he was all right. As she stood up, she looked to see John and the girl helping her brother, and she smiled. It wasn't that he didn't look for her, or that he wanted to spend time with this other girl. John was worried about Loris, just as she was, and would rather help him than listen to a crowd cheer. She stood up and began to move to the back. "Where are you going, sweetling?" "Yeah," her grandmother asked. "I'm going to make sure Loris is fine, grandmother. I'll come with you, dear," her mother said, and Marjorie smiled at her. The two of them walked from the stands and headed to the back where she knew Loris and John would be. As they walked, her mother asked her about her morning and how things had gone with the food order, which surprised her as she hadn't spoken to her mother about what she and John were doing. "It went well, mother. Though it seems we underestimated things, it would take us moons to hand out that much food." "Good. That's so much better, sweetling." "How so, mother?" "Sweetling, if you gave out food to people who need it, what happens when it's gone?" "They go hungry, mother," Marjorie said, realizing where her mother was going with this. "Right." "Indeed. So if it's going to take moons to hand it out, what happens?" "They get fed for longer, so it takes them longer to go hungry." "Oh, mother, that's wonderful. John will be pleased," Marjorie said as her mind began to work out the possibilities. They could hand out some food, deliver some to orphanages, then the rest could be handed out regularly, allowing people the chance to at least get some sort of regular meals. She and John could even expand upon it, have regular shipments added to their stores. Marjorie couldn't wait to speak to John about this. They turned the corner and made their way to the tents where they saw John, Loris, a maester, Lord Jamie, and Lady Jenna and the girl from the fight, much to Marjorie's annoyance. "Lady Ellery, Lady Marjorie," Lord Jamie said, noticing them first. "Lord Jamie, Lady Jenna," her mother said, and she repeated before almost running in to see her brother. She hugged him tightly and watched as John bid farewell to the girl before turning to her. A soft smile on his face. He looked worried though, concerned, and she too began to worry. "I'm sorry, Marjorie. I should have done better. I should have made sure Loris wasn't hurt." "I'm fine, you know." Loris said, smiling. "It's quite all right, John. I was so worried, though," Marjorie said as John smiled at her and moved closer to rub her back. She felt her heart race and almost wished to cry just so he'd hold her tightly. "My lady, my apologies. It's my fault. I should have done better," John said as her mother entered. "It's fine, John." "Loris, how are you feeling, sweetling?" her mother said and fussed over her brother for the next few moments. Both she and John enjoyed the looks. Loras gave them, proving he was less hurt than she feared. They stayed for a while before the maester said Loras would be fine and gave him some milk of the poppy, which, much to their amusement, made him behave quite silly when they brought him back to the Lannister manse. After putting him to bed, John escorted her and her mother back to the Red Keep. She told him about her ideas regarding the food distribution, and the look he gave her reminded her so much of her grandmother and the look she'd give her when she figured something out that she couldn't keep the beaming smile from her face. When he told her who the girl was, he'd fought at first. She pouted, but soon she realized Brienne wasn't his friend the same way she was. "Are you nervous about the joust tomorrow?" "No, not really. I win or I lose, so be it," John said nonchalantly. She hit him then, hard on the shoulder, twice, watching amusedly as he looked at her in confusion. "What was that for?" "That's for making me worry." "What were you thinking, John? You could have lost your hand in a joust. Don't you know what happened to my brother?" She said angrily. "Marjorie, I'm sorry. Please look at me. I'm sorry, all right. I didn't think, but I had to. I had no choice," he said pleadingly. "Of course you did. You just didn't want to choose it. Why not have Laura speak for you or Jamie? They were there. They saw how Lord Tully acted." If they had, then there'd be more trouble than ever. I'm just a bastard, Marjorie." "You're not. You're more than that. You're John. Just John," she said. And he smiled. To you I am, but to them I'm a bastard, so a bastard's word is nothing. But if Jamie spoke or Loras, well then that's the Warden of the West, the son of the Warden of the South. That's huge, Marjorie. That would create problems between the Riverlands, the Reach, and the Westerlands, she said, and he nodded. "But a joust. John, it's dangerous. You could be hurt," she said worriedly. Though should I carry a beautiful maiden's favor, I'd be sure to win, would I not?" John said, and she laughed. "Really, and what beautiful maiden's favor did you have in mind?" She said, her lopsided grin and raised eyebrow hiding her blush. "Why, my lady of High Gardens, of course," John said as he bowed to her. She giggled as she reached into her dress and took a ribbon from her pouch, the green and yellow colors gleaming in the light. John held out his arm and she tied it to it, smiling all the time. "I shall return it after my victory." "My lady, see that you do good, sir," she said. And they both began to laugh. "Please be careful. Just John," she said as she turned to walk away. "I shall endeavor to return unharmed. Just Marjorie." Cool. The next day, Jamie. Gods, he missed this. It had been years since he'd jousted, years since he'd faced off against a worthy opponent, though given his draw for this, it may still take a while for that to take place. Both John and Loras accompanied him this morning, though he did send John off to do some practices himself, much to the boy's annoyance. He had laughed loudly when he saw John's shield that was going to raise some eyebrows, but still the boy was a novice, and though Edmure was no talent to be sure, he was older and stronger. There would be 5 jousts before the final. His first was against a knight from the Stormlands, a Sir Burst Caron from Night Song. Jamie's golden armor was shined to perfection, both his boys having spent hours on it. Honor was draped in a bright red caparison, the golden lion clear on either flank. Usually Honor wore Kingsguard colors, but even though he was still one, to the realm at large, he was the head of House Lannister. He took the lance from Loras and smiled as he saw John on Winter poking his head from the corner to see the tilt. The herald made the introductions, and Jamie kicked Honor into gear. His horse raced down the line as if he had did so just yesterday, its instincts more primed and attuned than Jamie's own. The first hit landed on Burst's shield, as did the second by the third. Though Jamie was in his element, the rustiness all but gone. He heard the cheer of the crowd before he felt the force of the blow that took Sir Burst from his horse. Turning back, he caught his sister's eye and shook his head. The woman no doubt assumed she'd be getting a crown when all Jaime wanted was to rip one from her head. "My lord, that was outstanding," Laura said, smiling brightly. It was not so bad, though it still needs to better. Better, my lord? You think that ride would beat the bold?" He dismounted and walked to his tent while Loras led Honor away. As he passed John, he gave him a nod and then motioned for him to get back to work, another hour at least, and then he'd allow him come squire with Loras. He smirked at the favor John was trying to hide. Lady Marjorie had given him hers, but the boy knew the scandal. It would cause for it to be seen on a bastard's arm, so had hidden it beneath his tunic, something which he and Loras had ribbed him for most of the day, which resulted in the targets being hit even harder in practice. Drinking some water. He pondered what John had told him, how John Aaron had arranged the duels and organized the melee with the intent to do him harm. John had practically had to order him to stand down, as had he not. Then they'd be looking for a new hand right now, but his king ordered him to wait, and wait he would for now. It felt like no time at all passed before Loras came back. It was time for his second, and he wondered who he'd face. "Lord Malister, my lord," Loras said, smiling. "Good damn coward," Jaime said, and mounted Honor. Honor, the Lord of Seaguard and his heir, had hid, rather than tell the truth. While he could do nothing to protect John in his joust, he'd make sure those who forced his hand would pay the consequences. Starting now with Lord Jason, he lined up Honor, and at the signal began to charge, forcing his horse to go faster. The lance hit home and true, but Lord Malister didn't fall. Jaime could see, though, how his shoulder pained him now. The second tilt finished the job, as Jaime was sure to hit the same spot. The cowardly lord would be feeling that one for a while, he thought. He looked to the corner to see John smirking on top of Winter. He nodded, and his king almost fell laughing from his horse. Riding back to Loras, he saw that he too was laughing. He dismounted and shook his head at the lad. "Give him some oats and water. He deserves it." "Aye, my lord, he does, don't you, boy? Good job," Loras said, patting his horse's head, and Jaime laughed before heading back. It was an hour or so until his next tilt. He watched his brother defeat Ser Jorah and Lord Jan after 6 and 4 tilts respectively. He watched as the Hound beat Lord Beric and the Strongboar, the second one lasting 8 tilts. Eventually, he was up again, this time against Thoros of Myr. The crazy red priest had come down ill during the melee, and though not a renowned jouster, was still a difficult opponent to unseat. The priest offered a pair to R'hllor, and the joust began. The first tilt he missed, he actually missed, and the priest laughed, saying his god favored him this day. The second one he hit as he did the third, but the priest never budged, each hit catching him square. Yet he was immovable. As he lined up the fourth, he saw John shrug his shoulders, and he shook his head to find his king laughing. Annoyed at himself, he raced down and caught the priest full force. The man flew from his horse and lay unmoving for a moment. "Damn, perhaps it was a different day, my lord," Thoros said as he got to his feet, forcing Jaime and the crowd to laugh. When he got back to his tent, John was there waiting for him, his hour up on his practice. "What was that?" Jaime asked. "What, my lord?" John said innocently. "That shrug you gave me." "Oh, that. You were too calm. You needed to be more angry. Fire needs fire," John said, and he just shook his head and laughed. "So you decided to piss me off?" "Aye." "Garion said it usually works with you," John said, and Jaime reached out to pretend to hit him, only for him to jump back. "Gonna have to be quicker than that to catch me, my lord," John said, only to grimace a second later when Loras hit his head. "Or just sneakier," Loras said, and the two boys began to wrestle. Jaime laughed as he watched them. He was glad to see Loras showing no ill effects from the knock he took the day before. Had he been more hurt, then both he and his king wouldn't have held back. After a few moments, the two boys stopped their japing and thoughts turned to the next opponent. He knew Aaron Santager well, the man having served as master of arms at the Red Keep since his time as a Kingsguard. It surprised Jamie the man had made it this far, but perhaps he had a favorable draw. Barristan was to face Robar Royce, who had fared better than his father. The Hound was up against Osmond Kettleback, and while the man may almost be as big as the Hound, the match to Jamie's eye was a foregone conclusion. The last pairing was Sir Aris Oakhart against Sir Richard Horb, both Kingsguards, and while Jamie had nothing against Aris, he didn't much like the man. He didn't know Sir Richard at all, but Barristan spoke highly of the knight, and his brother's goodwill was not something he gave freely. "Well, shall we then?" Jamie said, polishing off his mug of water. "Aye, it seems we must," Loras said, smirking, John already rushing out to get Honor ready. They made their way to the tilt yard, Jamie not sure about his opponent. He wondered how good Aaron had got. Had he improved? Was he better? Or was it simply the draw? He would know in a few moments. The Dornishman's horse was decked out in the colors of his house, blue on one side and white on the other, the leopard holding an axe. It was only a Dornishman who could get away with those colors. At the signal, he kicked Honor into a run, his horse stretching and quickly gaining speed. He raised the lance and hit dead center in the shield, his opponent's blow a miss. They lined up again, riding to the same result, though he could see his hits had an effect, as Aaron's shield was being held a little less tightly. For the third tilt, he urged Honor even faster, and it had the desired effect. He reached Aaron before the man could set himself and watched as he was unhorsed. He turned to make sure the man rose, and then rode back to hand off the lance. "Good job, my lord." John said, a large smile on his face. "Good. That was excellent. The way you caught him, my lord, that was perfect," Laura said, saying nothing. Jamie dismounted as Loras led Honor away. John rushed off to get him another drink, while he moved to the corner as Barristan rode by, nodding to his brother as he waited for his tilt to begin. John arrived back with a jug of water and a couple of mugs, and Loras arrived a few moments later. All three stood there as Barristan faced off against Robar Royce. Looking at his brother's opponent, Jamie found his armor to be a pale imitation of his father's famed bronze. The boy looked nervous, and Jamie couldn't blame him, for his brother was formidable. Barristan looked immaculate. His white cloak may have been left behind, but no one could doubt this was the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. His armor shined and polished so it sparkled in the sun. As the two rode together, Jamie almost felt a little jealous. To face his brother yet again was something he hoped for. They had jousted so many times in the past, both in tourneys and in practice. Yet it had been going on for almost 5 years since they'd last crossed sword or lance. Jamie found he missed it terribly. The first 2 tilts were basically a draw, but the third was a thing of beauty. Jamie watched as Barristan caught the boy so square, so flush that it didn't so much knock him from his horse. It instead catapulted him from it. "Now that's what perfect looks like," he said, turning to John and Loras, whose expressions showed they agreed. The next 2 contests they didn't stay around for, instead deciding to head back to their tent and await the results and the draw for the semifinals. Jamie was on tenterhooks as the results were brought in. The Hound had defeated Kettleback in 4 tilts, Sir Richard taking his match against Sir Aris in 3. He waited there with Loras while John raced off to find out the draw. It felt like hours until he came back, but when he did, he was smiling. "You got the Hound," Sir Barristan got Sir Richard. "Murray," John said, and Jamie sighed in relief. He wanted to face his brother in the final and would now need to beat the Hound to do so, no easy matter, but he wanted it more than the other man. Desire and skill were on his side, strength and power, though on his opponent's. They sat there waiting while the first semi-final took place. He couldn't watch, and John sat with him, Loras having gone to watch and bring them the result. "So who should I be cheering on in the final?" John asked, a mischievous smirk on his face. A bit presumptuous, don't you think? I mean, Sir Barristan may not make it. I may not make it, Jaime said nervously. You both will mark my words. Now back to my question, who should I be cheering on, or should I be neutral? Is that the protocol? Jon's smirk even bigger now. It is. I don't think that'll work this time, especially since I put my coin on you already. Jon said, looking at him seriously. Jaime felt it then deep inside. His king had chosen him. Even over his brother, he turned to say something, but felt his words get caught in his mouth, which turned out just as well as it was at that point. Loras came rushing back in, Sir Barristan in 6. My lord, Loras said, and Jaime looked as Jon nodded to him. He got up and steadied himself. Jon was beside him in a heartbeat, holding his helm in his hand. The trio walked outside, and Jaime waited while Loras untied Honor, patting his horse on the head he mounted. The crowd was more amped up for this tilt than any of his others, whether that was due to it being the penultimate before the final, or because it was Jaime against the Hound, he knew not. But as he lined up, he felt his own excitement build. At the signal, he raced down the field, his lance ready. The first hit was like being hit with a hammer. He felt his shield arm buckle, but it held steady. The second just as hard. But this one he deflected, his own strike seemingly ineffectual. The third caught the Hound on the shoulder, though it didn't faze him at all, while the fourth was another shield hit. As he lined up for the fifth tilt, he saw Jon drop his shoulder and lean left, while nodding towards the Hound. He looked at him again and saw Jon nod his head vigorously as he lined up. He figured it was worth a go. He let Honor loose, raised his lance, and went for it. Reaching the Hound, he dropped his shoulder, leaned left, and struck. The Hound's lance missed its target, and the man was unbalanced when Jaime's hit home. Being unable to readjust quickly enough, it was over, and the Hound fell. He coughed and spluttered a bit, but was soon to his feet, and Jaime turned to ride back. The winner of the semi-final, Lord Jaime Lannister. The events will break now for luncheon, after which we will have the honor joust between Lord Edmure Tully and Jon Snow, and the final of the joust between Lord Jaime Lannister and Sir Barristan Selmy. The herald announced loudly. Jon. Watching Jaime joust for real was an experience neither he nor Loras would ever forget. The man was born for this, born to be the Golden Knight, to have tales spread and songs sung. Yet when they spoke of his father, Jaime had told him of the tourney of Harrenhal, of the joust his father had with Sir Arthur Dayne. He had told him of his father beating Sir Barristan, and Jon longed to having been there to see it. Having watched Sir Barristan, who was as formidable as Jaime said, and seen just how good Jaime himself was, the thoughts of how his father compared wouldn't leave his mind. Was he really that good? Or was it that he, knowing who he would crown, he just wanted it more? Jaime told him in a joust desire, allied to skill, gave you an edge. If you wanted it more than your opponent, and you were more skilled, you would win. Loras helped him with his armor. And Jon knew that no matter what was going through Edmure Tully's mind, there was no way that man wanted this more than he. He had dared call his mother a whore, dared insult his father. No, Jon knew that what he felt inside him right now was far greater than desire, greater than want. This was need, pure and simple need. He needed to restore his mother's honor, to restore his father's, to let the realm see that this man, this fool from a dishonorable family, had no right to say such things about a she-wolf and a dragon. That wolves and dragons fed on fish, and to insult the mother of a wolf, the father of a dragon, was to ensure your fall from grace. As Loras handed him his helm, he nodded, and his friend gave him a smile and a reassuring pat on the back before sniggering when he handed him his shield. I'd wish you good fortune, but you don't need it, so instead go out there and show him. Show them all, Loras said. I will. Handing Loras his shield, he mounted Winter and leant forward, holding his head close to hers. He closed his eyes and could feel it as his mare's breathing calmed, could feel her heart slow. "Come on, girl." "Just like we practiced," he thought as he raised his head. Loras handed him the shield and he rode slowly out to the tilt yard, ready to face the floppy fish in front of the nobility of Westeros. Jaime sat up there beside his family. He knew, though he had wished to stay with him for the joust itself. "What are you, my squire, now?" "Jon, a Jate. You know what I am," Jaime said seriously. I do. Which is why you need to be in the crowd, my lord. Anything else would look suspect." "Be careful, Jon." Jaime looked at him nervously. "Always, my lord." As he entered the tilt yards, he heard the gasps, and then the laughter. When people saw his shield, he looked down to see Edmure Tully's horse decked out in a ridiculously elaborate caparison. The blue and mud-red colors and the silver of the leaping trout. At the other end, he created a completely different picture. Winter was bare, but for her saddle and reins, she wore no colors, no caparison, because they inhibited movements. He waited until Edmure noticed his shield and smiled when the man almost fell from his horse. Turning to the crowd, he held the shield up so all could see. The shield was a smoky gray, ghost depicted in very clear detail. The white wolf's red eyes gleaming as he jumped in the air. In his mouth, the trout lay still, its silver scales clear. Its head and tail stuck out from either side of Ghost's jaws. When the king saw it, he laughed loudly, as did every one of the Lannisters. Jon could even see joy-mouthed Ghost, and Fishy to a laughing Geryon beside her. He looked to see Marjorie giggling while trying not to look concerned, and beside her, even her grandmother was smirking. "Your graces, my lords and ladies, people of King's Landing and the realm, what we have before us is a question of honor, one to be satisfied as all such matters should, by an honor's joust. By his grace's command, the loser of this joust will apologize to the winner, Lord Tully, Jon Snow. Make yourselves ready." The herald's voice boomed. Jon took a final look around. He could see Joy and Geryon smiling at him. Could see Tyrion signal he had coin on him. Could see Jenna and the children wish him well. He looked to the king, who was smiling, and to Sir Barristan standing behind him, who nodded. The Tyrells seemed eager for it to begin. Lady Olenna looking at him calculatingly, while Lady Allery and Lord Mace wore expressions of concern. Marjorie looked nervous, but when he reached to his arm and nodded, the smile she gave was beaming, and it filled his heart with joy. He looked to Lord Arryn, and the man was glaring at him. The woman beside him, looking like an older version of Lady Catelyn, wore an expression he knew all too well. Beside her sat a man with a pointed beard and a smirk on his face, and to his left sat a fat, bald man who was looking at him intently. He turned to see Loras, looking on excitement in his eyes, his friend giving him an encouraging smile as he handed him the lance. Finally, he looked to see Jaime, who was clearly concerned. As he moved Winter forward, he shrugged his shoulders, relieved to see Jaime finally smile. He lined up and got ready for the tilt. Felt Winter underneath him, coiled and ready to go. He moved his foot in the stirrup and they set off. Edmure was racing towards him, and Jon could see his form needed work. His horsemanship was passable at best, and his holding of the lance not much better. But Jon knew for him to unseat the fish, his lance needed to be true. In a simple battle of lances he could lose, which meant he needed to be better, cleverer, which he knew he was. So as they reached each other, he moved on the saddle and allowed Tully's lance catch his shield flush. To those watching and to Edmure, he had delivered a stinging blow. But to Jon, his movement had allowed it to just seem that way. Instead, the shield had absorbed and deflected it just as he planned. Jon feigned, trying to right himself on Winter, trying to steady himself, his hand on his shield loosening seemingly because of the hit. As they lined up again, Jon was still not sitting right on Winter's back, the shield still not in the right place in his arm. He could hear the whispers in the crowd as he charged forward. could almost feel Edmure's glee as he rode towards him. Before they reached the quarter point, John let the shield fall to the sound of gasps from the crowd. By the time he reached the halfway point, his foot was loose from his stirrup, and he looked ready to fall. When he reached the three-quarter point, they could see as Edmure lowered his shield to concentrate on the easy hit he presented to him. Had he been able to see the crowd, he'd have seen Marjorie hold her hand to her mouth, seen Jaime jump to his feet. Had he looked back, he'd have seen Loras look on in terror. But with no shield, his hand was free to grab Winter's reins. With his foot not in the stirrup, he could move quicker and easier. And with Edmure's shield lowered, he had a much larger target. As they clashed, he moved to the left, looking to all as if he slipped. Edmure's lance, which was heading straight for his chest, found only air. John's did not. The only sound louder than the cheers from the crowd was, to John's mind, the sound as Edmure Tully hit the ground. He righted himself on Winter and rode slowly back, taking a moment to laugh as he passed a clearly devastated fish, Barristan. He had almost left the fat oaf and ran to the field when he saw his king lose his shield, and what looked to be his seat. He had watched on in horror as he awaited the sound of the lance striking his chest. But when he saw his king move, saw the way he maneuvered on the horse, saw the lance hit Tully square and take him from his mount, he had actually cheered, had actually shouted like he had as a young boy once at a tourney many years ago. He was not the only one either. The crowd had feared the worst. He could see that. They like he had expected to see John get badly hurt when he lost his shield. They thought he was about to fall long before he reached Tully. But to see him not only not fall, but win, to win when the odds seemed so stacked against you, now that was a story people would tell, and Barristan realized what it was the king had meant. A story. Barristan. A damn story, that's what he told me. He thinks this is a story. Jaime had been furious, and Barristan had agreed. But he was their king, and their oath was to him. He commanded, they followed. For if he was the good king they both believed him to be, then surely they needed to trust his choices. So he had bit his tongue and said nothing, and now riding out for his own joust, he couldn't help but smile. A story indeed. He nodded to Jaime and Loras Tyrell, who was squiring, his king sitting in the crowd to show no favor. As he passed the false king and queen, he saw him, and his king smiled and nodded his head. To his left, he saw his old friend hiding amongst the crowd. Had he not seen him earlier, he'd not have been able to find him, but he was glad to see Sir Richard there. His friend seemed different, standing straighter and more proud. And he was glad to see it. He nodded at him and looked up to the king, and Barristan knew he'd recognized him. Your graces, my lord and ladies, men and women of King's Landing, and the realm I give you, the final of the joust between Sir Barristan Selmy, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, and Lord Jaime Lannister, the Warden of the West, and Lord Paramount of the Westerlands. He lined up and waited for the signal. When it came, he raced down the field, his lance catching Jaime's shield flush, but Jaime's doing the same. The second and third tilt were a hit and a miss for both of them, and the fourth was Sir Jaime's with a hit. He took the fifth and sixth, and Jaime the seventh. The eight was his, but the ninth was Jaime's. He could hear the crowd's excitement build. Not since Harrenhal had he felt like this alive. At times, thinking back, he had wished he had won that day. But now, with Rhaegar's son looking on, he was glad he had not. The boy would be the king his father should have been, and all Barristan wished for was to serve him. As he looked down at his brother at the other end of the field, he thanked the gods that he had found him. It was the 13th tilt that decided it. He was leading 6-5 with a draw on the other. He lined up and felt it in his bones. This was not 10 years ago, and he was an older man. But tired though he was, he wouldn't give in. He charged down, and as they clashed, a sudden feeling of weightlessness caught him by surprise. It took him a moment and the impact of hitting the ground to realize he'd been unhorsed. The fall wasn't as bad as it could be, and he had barely felt the force of the lance. But as he sat back up, the pain came and he coughed for a bit before making it to his feet. This was why jousting is a young man's game, he thought with a smirk, as he nodded at his brother to show he was fine. Jaime nodded back before heading over to pick the garland of roses up on his lance. He watched on as his brother passed the queen and handed the garland to a smiling little girl. "Lady Joy, I would name you the Queen of Love and Beauty," Jaime said as the crowd cheered loudly. "The Knight of Skulls and Kisses." When he had received the note from Sir Barristan, he had been surprised to see it contained only 2 words, a name, one which he'd heard a lot of over the past few years. He held the note over the candle and watched as it burned and wondered just exactly what message his old friend was sending him about Jon Snow. So he decided to watch the boy, to see just why Sir Barristan thought him to be of interest, why he thought that he himself would be interested. At first he sent his men to check the boy out. The reports were all similar. A nice boy, polite, respectful, well-liked by the Lannisters, and Jaime Lannister in particular. That alone was a mystery. He knew Ned Stark had no love for the Kingslayer. Yet, he'd allowed his bastard squire for him. Not only that, but the boy had by all accounts made the Lannister an even larger amount of coin than they already had. Most strange indeed, though he had been glad to find out that the boy also helped out his fellow Northerners. As more reports of the boy came in, they again showed no reason why Sir Barristan would be sending him a note on him. The boy was close to the Tyrells, especially the daughter and youngest son. He was very friendly with Geryon Lannister's bastard daughter. Finding out the boy had a large white wolf was a bit of a shock, but again nothing that concerned him. It wasn't until he got the report about the events at the feast that he found himself grow intrigued. He did what? Apparently Lord Tully called him a bastard, his mother a whore, and tried to strike the boy. He then demanded the boy apologize to him. So what happened? The boy apologized, sort of. He called Lord Tully an oathbreaker, said his house were graspers and was doomed with him in charge, all in the form of an apology. That was when he decided to see the boy for himself, and he was glad he did. Seeing the boy enter the tavern after Sir Barristan had been a shock. Seeing the spider's little birds following him had not. He kept to the shadows and followed the boy when he left and saw the exchange with the gold cloaks and Kingsguard. When Sir Barristan turned up, he almost groaned at the stupidity. You don't leave secret meetings like that, old friend. He turned to see the little bird following in the background. What he had then seen in the throne room that day would stick with him for the rest of his life. He saw a boy act a man and a king hiding in plain sight as a bastard, for there was no doubt in his mind that Jon Snow was not Ned Stark's bastard. Jon Snow was the son of the man he most admired for all of his life. Jon Snow was Rhaegar's son, which meant that he was the rightful king of the 7 kingdoms. For almost 10 years he'd struggled. He'd lived when they died, Arthur, Oswald, Gerald, Miles, Rhaegar. He'd watched on as the men who stole the throne ran the realm into the ground, and he'd been unable to do anything about it. When he'd heard that Barristan was seeking information, he'd made himself known to his old friend. Spying was not a game. Barristan was equipped to play, but Richard found he was born to it. Being dead helped, not caring about living helped even more. Now, though, as he walked to the house in Flea Bottom that he worked out of, his heart felt lighter, different as it had for most of the day. Once he'd figured it out, he watched the king even closer, and what he found filled him with something he thought he'd lost, something he never dared believe he'd get back: hope. For the first time since the Trident, Richard Longmouth had felt hope. With it came fear, excitement, and so much more. But for once he felt more capable than he ever had. Unlike with Rhaegar, he was now in a position to help his king. He knocked on the door and waited for it to be opened. Entering, he took his seat and handed out the coin. You boys have any trouble with him? No. It was easy, never saw us coming. Good. You know what to do when it's done right. Aye, he's a big juicy one. There'll be good eating for the lads on him. Richard laughed, glad he always ate elsewhere. Bowls of brown had never passed his lips, he was happy to say. He nodded and stood up, walking to the chest behind him. He changed his clothes and dressed in the armor he hadn't worn in years. The three-headed dragon shined. The armor was fully polished, and putting it on, he was almost back on the trident all those years ago. Are you with me, Richard? To the death, my king. But it had been Rhaegar's and not his. When he had woken, he was broken and alone. His wounds had taken a long time to heal, and when he did, he found his world had shattered, as had his heart. For 10 years he'd been a shell of a man. He had failed the father. He would not fail the son. When he finished dressing, he grabbed his sword and walked to the room. Entering, he saw the man tied to the chair, his mouth ungagged. The disguise may fool some, but Richard knew him all too well. He had spent years watching and knew every little step the man took, knew how to hide from him, knew how to find him, what routes he took. He knew when he took them, what disguises he wore. As clever as the man thought he was, it's hard to keep your movements secret from a man you think dead. Lord Varys. Sir Richard, you know why you're here? I believe you're about to kill me, sir, though I know not why. Really, Spider, these are your last moments on this earth, and still you cannot speak truly. Richard laughed. I know why you may want me dead, Sir Richard, though you are wrong to do so. It's why you've decided to do so now that gives me pause. Really? And why do you think I'm wrong to want you dead? Richard asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. I did not do what you think I did. Really, you didn't betray Rhaegar. You didn't convince Aerys to keep Elia and the children close, to send all the Kingsguard with his son. Do you think me a fool, Lord Varys? Or is it the fact you assumed all those who knew the truth had died? He watched as the eunuch's face fell, the color draining from it. It was Lewin who told him when last they met how he'd heard the eunuch whisper in Aerys' ear how Rhaegar's plans had been foiled yet again by the slippery spider. The man in front of him was as much responsible for Elia and the children's deaths as Tywin and his monsters. Yet Richard had waited and not sought justice, for his heart was empty and it would bring him no comfort. Instead, he had written to Dorne, sent messages to Oberyn, yet received no reply. How did you stop the messages, Varys? My little birds are everywhere, Sir Richard, and when it comes to my safety, I thought it prudent to place them close to the Martells, though I did not know it was you who sent them. Did that not give you pause, make you think that you were not as safe as you believed? Sir Richard, no one is safe. Not in the great game. You win or you die. There is no middle ground. Richard nodded before walking to the door and looking to his man. Will it be clean? Varys asked. Aye, cleaner than you deserve. Why now, Sir Richard? Varys asked, but Richard said nothing, instead grabbing the block and laying it down. He helped Varys from the chair, left his hands tied and leaned him over the block, holding his sword. He looked at the man before him. He had caused so much hurt, so much pain, so much death over the years, for reasons that Richard knew he'd never fully understand, even now facing death. The eunuch would not give up his secrets. If he thought he would, then he'd hand him over to the Martells, let Oberyn at him, but it would be a wasted effort, and perhaps the spider would find a way out, spin a web and scurry off. It wasn't worth the risk. He was paying far too much attention to the king. In the name of Jaehaerys Targaryen, the third of his name, the one true king of the Andals, Rhoynar and First Men, Lord of He, 7 kingdoms and protector of the realm, I, Sir Richard Lonmouth, do hereby sentence you to die. He raised the sword and brought it down swiftly and cleanly, and watched as Varys' head rolled across the floor.